we are live on the University of Denver campus. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Ann Trujillo. Denver 7, the Denver Post, and the Center on American Politics here at the University of Denver are partnering tonight to bring you the final gubernatorial debate before Election Day. And I am moderating tonight alongside Nick Garcia.
Good evening, Ann. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you here. Before we begin, we want to quickly introduce our two candidates. I know you know them from the ads, right? Walker Stapleton, the Republican, is the current state treasurer. Jared Polis, the Democrat, is the current U.S. representative from Boulder. So, as you know, we flipped a coin to decide who will stand where, who will answer the first question. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer most questions, 30 seconds for rebuttal at our discretion. So we have asked our audience here to be on their best behavior and hold your applause until the end, because we have a lot of territory to cover tonight, and we want to start with negative advertising. Governor Hickenlooper is known for running mostly positive campaigns. He has said on numerous occasions there's no profit in making enemies. Meanwhile, we have watched Republicans and Democrats spend millions on negative advertising in this campaign. How much input do you have in the content of those ads, and what do you say to Colorado voters who are sick of the negativity? Mr. Stapleton, we'll begin with you.
Well, thank you very much to the University of Denver for having me. My wife, Jenna, is a proud DU School of Social Work graduate, and she's here with my son, Craig. Thank you, Ann. I think that negative ads are unfortunate, but our campaign is the little engine that could. We have been outspent by Congressman Polis about 24-1 in terms of his personal resources, and that's why I supported a ballot initiative in this year's election to even the playing field. And we have put out positive messages about our plan to fix Colorado's infrastructure for the long term, to make the access and affordability of health care better for young Coloradans, to improve agencies in state government that deal with Medicaid expansion, and to make sure that we keep more dollars in the classroom. But we are being dwarfed in spending, but that's okay, because we are trying hard to get our message out, and I think it's resonating with voters that we want a fiscally responsible Colorado in the future. So
input, how much input do you have?
Well, I don't have much input because I don't have the personal resources that Congressman Polis does. He spent more personal money than anyone in Colorado history, Republican or Democrat combined.
We'll let you answer that question.
Well, look, again, I think that's something of an insincere answer. With all of the outside special interests backing and throwing money from out of the state into Walker's campaign groups and PACs, they're basically spending about as much as us. You know the truth, Ann. We have input into the campaigns that our campaigns runs, just the ads that our own campaign runs. Walker's main ad that he spends, I think, 28 of the 30 seconds attacking me. Attacking, by the way, plans I don't have. He says I want to do all these crazy things. We're trying to stay positive. We're talking about a positive vision for Colorado's future, and of course responding where we need to the false negative attacks.
Congressman Polis, Treasurer Stapleton brought up your wealth, and you've suggested that your wealth actually insulates you from special interests who can sometimes help run negative ads, fund campaigns. You've said it will help you govern more effectively. Does that mean that only millionaires can govern effectively?
Look, this is an election is not about millionaires like Walker Stapleton or Jared Polis. When I talk about preschool and kindergarten, you know what? Walker and I can afford preschool and kindergarten for our kids. What I'm fighting for are the families that can't afford it. Why should our kids get an advantage over families that can't afford preschool and kindergarten, families who can't afford college? This state is about opportunity. America is about opportunity. I'm proud to say no to PACs, no to special interests, to limit contributions to $100. And I'm proud that we have over 4,000 individual donors to my campaign, and yes, I'm putting in my money alongside them to be able to get the word out about our plans to make healthcare less expensive and save small businesses money, our plans to expand the economy and make sure that growth works for everyone, and the plan to invest in our schools so that we really can prepare every child for success.
Mr. Stapleton,
well,
yes.
I would just like to point out for the viewers at home, or to translate, Jared is worth about $500 million, and his money is going alongside of billionaires like George Soros and Tom Steyer, who are spending millions of dollars in Colorado to try and influence this election. So the idea that he's the only person spending millions and millions and millions, about 25 million so far, on his behalf is not exactly the case. It's also alongside billionaires like Tom Steyer and George Soros.
And just real briefly here, again, Walker's putting over $1 million into his own campaign. I hope we can get to the issues. I mean, the issues are ultimately what matter. I think the voters are seeing a lot of ads. In fact, they're probably tired of both of our ads at this point.
Well, let me ask you a question about that, because the Denver 7 Newsroom received several emails like this one from Carolyn. Please ask Jared Polis why he changed his last name. Numerous questions about this. Mr. Stapleton's allies are running an ad which implies you change your name because of the 1999 incident involving an employee. So quickly explain to us why you changed your last name.
Yeah, I was born Jared Polis Schutz. As a young man, I changed it to Jared Schutz Polis. That's my mother's maiden name. I grew up very close to my grandmother, June Polis, who just passed away a few years ago at the age of 96. So obviously, throughout my time in business and in public service, I go by Jared Schutz Polis or Jared Polis. Obviously, I think it's bizarre that anybody would attack somebody for a personal decision like that to honor your mother's maiden name, but it just shows the desperation and the shamelessness that many of the special interest groups supporting Walker Stapleton have descended to.
Thank you.
Treasurer Stapleton, this comes from Doug, a Denver Post reader, who says, every other day I get a mailer funded by the Stapleton campaign that attacks Jared Polis's integrity, and none from the Polis campaign slandering Stapleton. What would you, Mr. Stapleton, like me to learn about you from this behavior?
Well, I would say that he is, that's a selective opinion. There have been millions and millions of dollars slamming me on all sorts of false accusations during my time as treasurer. And during my time as treasurer, finishing up my second term, I've stood up for taxpayers every step of the way. I've worked with Democrats and Republicans on really consequential economic policy legislation that's impacted Coloradans' lives. I've started the first ever land trust investment board for Colorado's land trust, and the money goes to our education permanent fund. Did it with Democrat and Republican support. I passed sweeping debt consolidation to increase the transparency and accountability of all of our state agencies, with the exception of two. Did it with Democrat and Republican support.
So, Mr. Stapleton, why hasn't this been a
long
part
track
of your
record.
campaign, though?
Well, resources are a reality, and money is a reality in politics. And when you're being outspent personally 25-1, as I have been outspent, it's a little hard to get your message out. I don't have the megaphone that Jared Polis does, but I'm going to use the microphone I do have to get my positive message out, and that's exactly what we've been doing.
Thank you. We are moving on to a lightning round. In this section, we want to highlight some of the ballot initiatives that Coloradans will be voting on in 2 weeks. So we're asking you both to please limit your answer to a yes or a no. And then I promise we will be taking a deeper dive into some of these issues during the next 90 minutes. So first of all, Prop 109 requires the legislature to borrow up to $3.5 billion to fix our damn roads. It does not raise taxes, but would cost $260 million a year out of the budget. Do you support this, yes or no?
I'm opposed to 109. That's one of the ones I've taken a position on.
I am for it because I know we have the money and taxpayers have done enough.
Proposition 110 raises the state sales tax to help fund transportation projects. Supporters say it could raise $21 billion for our roads. Do you support this?
I haven't taken a position on 110.
I don't know how you can take a position when you're not take a position when you're running for
It's a
governor.
yes or
I'm
no,
opposed to it because 60 cents on the dollar goes to roads and bridges, and we need 100 cents to go to roads and bridges.
Amendment 73, which raises taxes on high earners and corporations to fund education. Do you support this?
I haven't taken a position on 73.
I'm opposed to it. Again, I don't understand how you can run for governor and not take a position.
Or how you can run for governor and take a position opposed to every citizen's initiative that people put on the ballot to fund our roads
Amendment
or fund our
74
schools.
forces governments to pay back property owners if a government decision reduces their property value. Do you support this?
Strongly against it. I urge everybody to vote no on 74.
I'm for individual property rights, but I would look to the legislature to fix this so it doesn't become something like conservation easements and get taken advantage of by
Prop
private
112, we know, is all about oil and gas setbacks. If it passes, new drilling wouldn't be allowed within 2,500 feet of occupied buildings and other vulnerable areas. Do you support this?
No.
No.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Stapleton, renewable energy sources now account for about 1/4 of Colorado's electricity. Yet neither wind, solar, nor hydropower is mentioned on your energy plan and your website. Do you plan to continue to help that side of the industry grow? Or would you like to see more coal and natural gas power in the state?
You bet I do. I'm the only candidate in the governor's race that has an all-of-the-above energy policy. I support wind, I support solar, I support natural gas, oil, and clean coal. But I don't support, like Congressman Polis, subsidizing alternate forms of energy, renewables, on the backs of Coloradans who can least afford it. We've spent $1.3 trillion around the world on renewables, and they still represent less than 3% of the global energy population. Congressman Polis has a plan which independent analysis said would cost $45 billion. And the way that it would be paid for is that once you get to about 65 or 70%, energy experts will tell you that to get from 65 to 70 to 100, they'll pass on the cost to the Coloradans who are struggling to put food on the table, who are working 2 jobs. The working mother will end up paying more for her electricity, more to heat her homes. And I don't want a Colorado dictating how we can turn on our lights or heat our homes at night. That's not the Colorado way. The Colorado way is to keep government out of our lives.
Let me ask you this. How close would you like to see drilling take place near your home in Greenwood Village?
Well, it's important to know that we've had a One Colorado energy policy that every governor from Roy Romer to Bill Owens to Governor Hickenlooper support, that Jared Polis would be a departure from. Even Governor Hickenlooper has called Congressman Polis's energy plan pretty radical.
So how close would you like to see it?
And it's gone from 100 to 300 to 500, and now 1,000 for high-density areas. And I think it's been a workable, bipartisan.
What's reasonable to you? Say
exactly where it is right now.
Thank you.
All right. Congressman Polis, you are opposed to 112. However, your party is split on this issue, and you've supported similar measures in the past. If 112 fails and you are elected, would you sign legislation that looks more like what you backed in 2014, which included a 2,000-foot step back and property rights so owners can negotiate different setbacks?
So, first of all, climate change isn't just an abstract issue. It's already affecting important Colorado industries like agriculture, like the ski industry. It affects our water, which is our life source and our source of our economy in Colorado. So we need to act, and we need to act now. I was proud to launch my campaign in Pueblo, Colorado, the first city in the state to commit to 100% renewable energy by 2030. We have a plan to get there by 2040. It does not include what Walker talked about, any subsidies. It does not include what he said costs a lot of money, which is a 100% mandate. But it really makes sure that we can work with our communities to get there. Yes, we need to do a better job in the meantime, before we reach that renewable energy future, making sure that any kind of extraction activity is done in a safe way. And I support.
So would you sign a bill that puts 2,000-foot setbacks and has property use rights, as you said, as you backed in 2014?
Right. Now, there's an important distinction, right? So one of the differences with 112 is I support greater setbacks
yes or no,
when
would
there's
you
not a
sign that
surface
bill?
use agreement in place. Well, you have to see the bill. Of course, I think that if there's not a surface use agreement, if the homeowner doesn't want it closer, we need to have a greater offset as a backstop. Most of the activity in our state takes place under an agreement with the owner of the land, and there's really not this type of dispute that needs to be solved by the governor.
All right, so if it does pass, and 112 does not currently have that property rights ownership agreement that you pushed in 2014, would you then ask the legislature to write a bill to amend 112 to include those property rights, so there could be negotiation between companies and landowners?
You know what? In these campaigns, we tell people what we think. I don't support 112, but if it passes, that's the will of the people, and it's the job of a governor to enforce the will of the people.
So no.
I would support the will of the people. The law, and if there's ambiguities, we'll work to clarify them.
All right, gentlemen,
it is the will of the people.
We're going to move on. We're going to change topics now to education. Education funding has been a tricky one to solve in Colorado. In November, dozens of Colorado communities will be voting on mill levies or bond issues to provide extra money for schools. Do you think Colorado has an effective system, or do you believe the state needs to step up and provide more money? Mr. Stapleton, you first.
Well, we've put a plan on our website to keep more money in the classroom for parents, because if you look across our 178 school districts in Colorado from 2011 on, what you find is that the number of students has grown by about 6%, the number of teachers has grown by about 8%, and administrative costs have grown by 35%. In some school districts in Colorado, the student population has gone down, the teacher population has gone down by double digits, and yet administrative costs have gone up by 40%. We did an analysis that came up with the fact that if we simply held the growth of the student population and teacher population in line with administrative growth from 2011 on across all of our 178 school districts. In some school districts, we would have nearly $4,000 more to pay teachers. I would take a numbers-based approach to education finance as governor. I've taken numbers-based approaches to problems as treasurer because it's hard to politicize numbers. Numbers illuminate problems in public policy, and I will be a pragmatic governor that makes promises that I know I can pay for, as opposed to Congressman Polis,
So
who is
are you saying that you think
$90 billion worth of costs, which would triple our budget.
Are you saying
and he
Colorado
would pay
does
for it
not
by
have an
tax
effective
increases.
system as is? Are you saying Colorado does not have an effective system
No, I
as
think
is?
it can do a better job of accountability and transparency across all of our 178 school districts. Some school districts have great accountability and transparency to all of us as Coloradans, as investors in the future of public education, as taxpayers, and some school districts really don't have any transparency at all. And every parent out there should be able to find out why money that they are
We're
spending
gonna move
is
on.
not getting into the classroom where
Congressman
it belongs
Polis.
for our kids.
Congressman Polis, how as governor would you lead an effort to reform the system, which likely would require some sort of vote of the people to untangle Amendment 23, Tabor, Gallagher?
I'm glad you asked because, as you know, I served 6 years on the State Board of Education. I not only started a charter school, but I was superintendent of a charter school for a few years, and I worked with President Obama to help write the Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind and gives states more flexibility to make it work. I think we need to be creative. In stark contrast to Walker Stapleton's statement that we should spend less on schools and send that money to prisons, I think we need to invest in schools. And yes, there's a local role, and I've supported. I've even chaired local mill levy and bond campaigns. And yes, there's a state role, not only in making sure we invest in our schools, but making sure that money actually reaches the classroom and also addresses some of the great funding disparities across our state to reduce class size and make sure we can recruit and retain the very best teachers in our state.
Because we know average teacher salary, for example, in Cherry Creek is $71,000. In Huerfano County, it's $37,000. What would each of you do to increase the talent flow of teachers to rural and less wealthy parts of our state where they have funding issues and starting pay is often way behind what teachers need compared to what teachers have along the Front Range?
You know, and frankly, average is often misleading. I always look at what the starting salary is too. So you take Thompson School District in Loveland, and they have a mill levy on the ballot this year. Starting teacher salary, $32,500. You got Fort Collins, Poudre School District to the north. You got St. Vrain, Longmont to the south. Starting teacher salaries of $39,000, $39,500, in basically the same commuting area. So in addition to making sure that we address the overall level of investment in our schools, starting, by the way, with making sure that every child has access to preschool and kindergarten. Our state only funds half-day kindergarten. Families pay $10,000 a year for preschool. It makes life even harder for families to afford. Our agenda is built from the ground up to save families money, but also to make sure that every kid gets a strong start and address some of the funding disparities in our public
So
education
we're asking about
system.
talent flow then to the rural areas and retaining jobs. How will that help?
Specifically, we have a plan to do a loan forgiveness for college loans for people who graduate from our schools of education and commit to teach 5 years or more in an underserved rural area.
Treasurer Stapleton, same question.
Well, we gave more BEST grants out, which are building excellent schools today. It's a program which helps
But how do you
rural
put
schools
teachers in those
fund
buildings?
capital improvement needs. We started the first ever Land Trust Investment Board, which goes to K through 12 education. And we have a more competitive school system if we have more accountability and transparency in where our dollars are going. And that is the approach we need to take, rather than a reflexive approach that says every time we need more money for education, we're going to go back to the taxpayers and ask for it, because the history of tax increases in Colorado for roads or education has not been a good one. And I think the onus of responsibility should be on government to explain where money is going. And if you look anecdotally at local tax increases across counties in Colorado for education, for infrastructure improvements, my friend John Suthers, the mayor of Colorado Springs, passed 2 infrastructure improvements. Education improvements pass all the time because people understand where the money goes. That is a responsibility that I will take on as governor, and I won't make false promises of free like Congressman Polis, which is really code for expensive in government terms.
So, Treasurer Stapleton, you brought up that you want to end administrative bloating to drive more funding to the classroom, but a lot of that administrative growth has happened as a result of new federal and state reporting mandates So what specific mandates at the state level would you ask lawmakers to roll back to reduce administrative burden?
Well, that's a great point, Nick, and I absolutely agree. And that's why we need to get to the numbers. And numbers help illuminate problems. And I know some school districts are really frustrated with federal regulations, with state regulations that have caused them to hire more administrators than they would like. But in the absence of transparent information, I really can't answer that question. Similar to the pension issue, I think all Coloradans should have equal access to the books of the state. What are we hiding? I've had trouble getting access to numbers from the Department of Transportation, from the pension system, and from our Department of Education. And I want to work with school districts to say, hey, if you can keep your administrative costs in check, then we may provide you greater funding. If you can explain to us what federal regulation costs you to hire more administrators, we'll do our best to get rid of it. This is a collaborative approach. It's a numbers-driven approach, as opposed to free, which Congressman Polis has absolutely no way to pay for except raising your taxes or raising the taxes on business.
Look, I mean, one of the great things about American society is public education is free. That's the very concept of public education. If we charged for our public schools, only the wealthy would be able to afford our schools. The truth is we have more flexibility now, thanks to the Every Student Succeeds Act. And what we need to do in education is focus on outputs rather than inputs. And yes, there's a difficult discussion to have about those outputs, because of course test scores might be part of it, but that's not the whole picture. There's attendance, there's graduation rates, there's engagement. But we need to move from looking at forms you fill out and requirements that we put upon teachers to making sure that we're looking at making sure that kids are getting a great education through objective criteria that we will work with stakeholders to develop.
Let's move on to the topic of transportation. With all of our needs for education and health care, can Colorado legitimately fix its roads and CDOT backlog without raising taxes, and if so, how? Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I hope so. But again, I would take an approach where we are the only candidate in the governor's race, and I invite people again to check out our campaign website, which has talked about 4 different dedicated sources of revenue, which I would prioritize for roads. Number 1, the federal tax plan. The state's economists have said we will have $1 billion plus windfall. We should use as much money as possible, and I will direct as much money as possible to go to roads. Congressman Polis wants to repeal that tax plan so he wouldn't have any of that money to use. Secondly, I've talked about taxing sports gambling. It's the American Gaming Commission has said it's $150 billion business. It's coming to Colorado. I think it can be $1 billion. I am for taxing it at 15%. I've also said we need to fix a broken regulatory model around medical marijuana that makes it easier for an 18-year-old kid to get a medical card than it is for him or her to get a 6-pack of beer or a library card. And there's 50% price disparities in some areas of Colorado. And finally, I've talked about Colorado versus 8 other mountain states in terms of what we spend per mile. If we get it in check, we have another $150 million for bonding, as opposed to Congressman Polis, who has no
Polis,
plan.
we'll let you answer that
no
question
plan to
now.
fund it. Zero.
Look, I think it's very dangerous to put our state $3 billion in debt, which 109 would do, which Walker Stapleton supports, without any revenue. And I don't think we have a disagreement about, for instance, the policies around gaming in Colorado, but we've run the numbers. And it would take 600 years, even if we get as much money as Nevada gets out of gaming, it takes 600 years to fund our current infrastructure gap in our state. The marijuana money is spoken for. Walker just talked about the best grants to schools. If you want to take it out of schools and put it into roads, yes, it's a drop in the bucket, but it certainly doesn't meet our needs. Look, depending on what 109 and 110 do, if they both fail, which is the scenario I think we're talking about here, where it'll fall to the next governor to figure out how to pay for our roads, I'm going to play a convening role and bring together Republicans, Democrats, Grand Junction, Colorado Springs, Denver, to figure out how we want to pay for it. I confidently agree with the principle that if you're going to build roads, you got to pay for them, and I believe that we need to do it in a fiscally responsible way.
Treasurer Stapleton, I want to give you a chance to respond to what Congressman Polis said, but specifically, if we just focus on 109 and our most urgent needs, could that just create a patchwork of quality roads and bridges and leave some places in Colorado out to dry if they can't pass local tax increases to fund their roads? And what role does the state have in making sure that we have a good statewide infrastructure from corner to corner?
Well, again, I would dedicate 4 sources of revenue from the general fund, which would bring hundreds of $millions for roads and bonding for roads into the future, not just on an incremental basis. Congressman Polis has no plan to pay for anything except tax hikes on business and individuals, which is why he never talks about how he's going to pay for anything, because he knows, and I can tell you as treasurer, there's only 2 ways. You either tax individuals or you tax businesses. His health care plan alone, which I look forward to getting into, would double the taxes on individuals and businesses.
Look, you'll notice that Walker spends more more time talking about plans I don't support rather than plans he does support. He knows very well that my plan is to reduce the income tax and the tax small businesses pay in Colorado by curtailing the tax giveaways in the tax code. And yes, we need an interconnected transportation system. We can't let it just fall to each city to do their own thing, because what matters is people getting between cities, from the suburbs into work. We need to have ways that people can do that. Lane expansion, yes, but also buses, rail expansion connecting to the existing light rail infrastructure. This is a real life issue that affects not only people getting to work, but also the places we love to recreate in our great state.
Gentlemen, we've covered a lot of territory in the last few minutes. We are going to take a break on Denver 7, and we'll let you collect your thoughts, and we will be back right here on Denver 7 in just a moment. Thank you. And welcome back to our gubernatorial debate. We want to start this second portion of our debate with a series of yes or no questions. And we are asking that you really do limit your question or your answers to a yes or no. And we will dive deeper into some of these topics a little bit later on. But first, we want to start with housing prices. With those skyrocketing across our state, do you believe state government should play a role in keeping them under control? Mr. Polis.
The state has a role in affordable housing, absolutely.
Treasurer Stapleton?
Not in price fixing, but yes, in finding a solution for more affordable housing, absolutely.
Do you believe the Broncos should fire head coach Vance Joseph?
Anyone, jump in.
Not yet.
You know,
Not
that's
yet.
a dangerous one to opine on. We need to change something up. How about that? I think we need,
Chad Kelly, maybe.
let's get our running game
Yikes.
going.
Okay, let's move on. Do you support changes to Tabor that would relax revenue growth limits?
Yes.
No, absolutely not.
Do you think a $12 minimum wage is appropriate?
Yes.
Yes,
Should certain places like bars and clubs be exempt from Colorado's smoking ban so that people may smoke marijuana inside?
Well, you're getting pretty specific there, Ann. I'd have to see what that was. You're talking the public consumption of tobacco or marijuana or both or what?
Marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it could be safer if people aren't always driving under the influence, and there's a role for public consumption that's tightly regulated.
Mr. Stapleton?
no, I would veto that bill like Governor Hickenlooper chose to do.
Would you support a proposal to extend Colorado's College Opportunity Fund to DACA students?
Yes.
No.
Would you sign a law to repeal the death penalty?
Yes.
No.
All right, we're going to give you both a minute to answer this question. 7 News viewer Pamela Dunn wrote in 2013, Governor Hickenlooper granted temporary clemency to inmate Nathan Dunlap, who was on death row for a shooting that killed 4 people. If you are elected the next governor of Colorado, how would you handle Dunlap's case? Can you sentence, extend the temporary clemency, or allow his execution to proceed?
I have no problem following the current law, but again, I don't think it's appropriate to comment on a specific case when what I would do as governor is review the case, talk to the victims, make an informed decision, and I don't think it's a type of decision, literally a life and death decision, that should be politicized during a campaign.
I don't believe it's a role of the governor to re-adjudicate something that's been decided by a judge and a jury. It's not something that I would something that I would have to do with a heavy heart, but I would have a period of time that would study the most effective means of carrying out something that has already been decided by a judge and jury and shouldn't be re-adjudicated by a governor.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to move on to climate change. When we asked readers and viewers for questions, overwhelmingly, this was the #1 topic on their mind. A new UN report, and we're starting with Congressman Polis, a new UN report says we need immediate and urgent action to curb the effects of climate change. And what will you do during your first year, if anything, to address this crisis?
So yes, climate change, again, is not only an abstract topic, it's affecting jobs in Colorado today, it's affecting our quality of life. I'm excited for Colorado to lead the way, continuing the legacy of John Hickenlooper. I continue the auto emission standards that John Hickenlooper signed up for our state, and we have a plan to get to 100% renewable energy by 2040 or sooner. We're going to do that by raising the cap on solar gardens, allowing communities to invest in their own developments, reducing financing costs for for home solar through a PACE program that was available for commercial and expanding that to residential. Work through the authority the governor has appointing members of the Public Utilities Commission to make sure we focus on keeping rates low, cleaner air, doing our part on climate, and moving to renewable energy. The exciting thing, Nick, is that Excel will tell you today that new wind energy costs 20% less than existing coal. So the sooner we can recognize the benefits of the green energy economy, the greater the savings will be for Coloradan
And the
ratepayers.
question was the first year.
Can you do all of that in your first year?
If we Democrats win the legislature, I think we have a good chance of getting our agenda at polisforcolorado.com done.
Treasurer Stapleton, same question.
Well, this
First
is a
year.
big difference. I support alternative forms of energy. I support the state tax credit program for wind and for solar. I support the federal tax credits, which may be going away, but I'm not going to mandate what type of energy Coloradans should use. Coloradans are a libertarian bunch. We want government out of our lives. We don't want government mandating what power we need to use. And I've spoken with energy experts who tell me that if Congressman Polis's mandate were put into place, it would result in hardworking Coloradans paying more for their electric bills, more to heat their homes. And that's a radical, extreme proposal. I have with me a Mega Millions ticket. Yes, I did. I don't even know if I won because I'm at this debate. But Congressman Polis has promised $90 billion from healthcare to energy to education, which means he could win Mega Millions tonight and would need to win another 55 times and would still be short. And the probability of him doing that is the same as the probability of him enacting any of his plans without raising taxes on hardworking Coloradans from healthcare to energy, or
Thank
alternatively
you.
on the business
And
community.
if I can-
And that's not the Colorado we want. That's not the Colorado we want.
If I can respond to
Thank you,
that
sir.
with 30
Yes.
seconds, because I can tell Walker's been practicing to try to land that line. This $90 billion figure is completely fictitious. It's based on a healthcare policy, Walker, Amendment 69, which you and I both didn't support. It's based on an energy plan that isn't ours. I am not, and I never have, supported a 100% mandate for renewable energy. It's a bottom-up, market-oriented plan to help reach that, and it's based on plans that I don't even support. So I hope that we can each talk about what our plan for Colorado is. I'm happy to talk about renewable energy all day, happy to talk about saving families
you.
money on healthcare all day, but those simply are not the plans that I support.
Can I walk him through it? I'm a
No,
numbers
we're
guy.
going to
I'd like
move on because
explain
we
the
have
$90 billion.
we have so many questions to get through. You have said, Mr. Stapleton, that you believe humans are contributing to climate change. If that's the case, what sort of human behavior needs to change, and what role does the state government play in pushing that change?
Well, I've had the chance to tour some of Colorado's hemp farms, which are really exciting. I took a tour of a 75,000-acre facility in western Colorado, and I support recategorizing hemp from the Farm Bill and CBD specifically as a Schedule I drug, and I support the environmentally conscious way that industrial hemp can contribute to something that Coloradans can do tangibly in our state against climate change. But again, I'm not for empty mandates. And your renewable plan, independent analysis, $45 billion. Your health care plan, more expensive than the one I defeated with Bill Ritter, $35 billion. Your education plan, a couple more billion. There's no way to pay for this. I've been the treasurer for 8 years. And I can tell you the only way to pay for it is by taxing businesses or individuals. And you said you support a payroll tax for health care. Well, Governor Ritter and I defeated state-run health care 2 years ago, it feels like last year, because it was a 10% tax on businesses, like your colleague in Vermont.
Thank you.
That would drive every business out of Colorado,
Thank you.
Congressman.
We'll let Mr. Polis have his
Everyone.
30
So,
seconds.
again, as you know, Bill Ritter is supporting me, as is John Hickenlooper. Look, my business cards are printed on hemp paper. I'm not sure what that has to do with climate change, though. I'm not sure why Walker's answer had to do with hemp. But let me tell you what we can do on climate change. First of all, we need to maintain the automobile emission standards that Governor Hickenlooper put in place that Walker Stapleton said he would repeal. Not only is that about climate, it's about our health. It's about the brown cloud. It's about making sure that we reduce asthma and, yes, even cancer rates, saving our health care money and ultimately saving lives. We need to make sure that we encourage investment in renewable energy by making sure we can recognize those savings for all of us.
We are moving on to another topic, and this is for both of you. And this question comes from Kathy in Loveland. She's asking about the gender pay gap, and she cites a 2018 report which says a female high school graduate will earn about $700,000 less over her lifetime than a man with a similar education. And she wants to know what you will do to remedy the gender equity gap in Colorado, and if you have had previous experience, both of you run companies, have you had previous experience addressing this issue? Mr. Stapleton.
Well, I'll be a governor who fully enforces federal law of equal pay for equal work and make sure that women can reach their dreams. I'm the father of a recently 5-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old, and I want to make sure that my daughters can be anything that they want to be. One wants to be an astronaut, the other one wants to be an artist. That may change, but whatever they do, I'm going to be a governor that protects women in the workplace, and I'm going to be a governor that fights for women, whether it be family leave for both spouses, and whether it be making sure that women can recognize all their economic opportunities.
You know, the very first amendment to the Constitution I signed on to when I was elected to be a U.S. representative was the Equal Rights Amendment, ERA. I think we need to do more, making sure that regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of who you are or where you're from, you have the same great opportunities in our country. And you know what, Ann? We've come a long way since the 1950s, the 1960s, but we're not there yet. There's too many people that, yes, there's a pay disparities that exist today. We also need to make sure that women have access to engineering, computer science. There's great work being done by the National Council for Women in Technology, located at the CU Boulder campus, an independent nonprofit that really helps spread many of the best practices around how we can make sure that not only women have access to high-paying careers in college, but it starts earlier. If you're going to become an engineer, it starts in middle school, starts in high school. So how do we get mentors out? How do we make sure that summer programs can welcome underserved minority communities and women to make sure that they can have some of the very best jobs of the future here in Colorado?
And my question for both of you, has either of you had any previous experience when you were running businesses that helped remedy this situation? Have you done anything about the wage gap?
I founded a theater company, Cinema Latinos, an entertainment group. We are a female CEO. We've had many female board members of the different companies I've been involved with. We've always made an effort to try to make sure that the diversity of leadership in the private sector represents the diversity of our state. I'll do the same as governor and make sure that all the senior levels of government are represented by women and men and people of color from across the state.
Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I've had the experience of taking a public company private. The chief accountant for our business is a woman who's worked for us for a long time. I created the first ever savings plan for our company so that we could match what the employees contribute for their retirement future. And as a result of taking our company private with the onerous Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, it resulted in paying our female employees more.
So polling so far, this race suggests women are more likely to support Democrats than Republicans. Why do you believe that's the case? And as governor, how are you going to ensure that women are fairly represented in policy and decision-making, the process? Treasurer Stapleton, we'll start with you.
There's more Democrats. Can you clarify the question?
So far, polling would suggest women are more likely to support Democrats.
Well, I don't accept that premise. I think people vote. Polls don't vote, and I think that plenty of women will support my agenda of economic opportunities, of families keeping more money in their pockets, of expanding economic opportunities from education to our roads, and actually talking about how to pay for things. Because as treasurer, I've been somebody who's fought for taxpayers every step of the way. I've been somebody who's kept government out of people's lives. I haven't been in Congress like Congressman Polis for 10 years, voting 96% of the time with Nancy Pelosi, supporting a carbon tax, the individual tax for the ACA, co-chairing with Bernie Sanders, his buddy who's coming out tomorrow and the next day to campaign with him, a federal version of Medicare for all that would bankrupt Colorado. I've been working for Colorado taxpayers, and I will have a ton of women, starting with my wife who founded Women for Walker, who will be turning out in the next 2 weeks to vote for me. I know I will.
Well, and let me ask you both this then. Would you guarantee tonight that at least 50% of your administration will be women and 32% non-white numbers, which, according to the most recent census, are a reflection of the diversity in our state? Would you guarantee that tonight?
You know what? I'm the only one here who's already done that. Our ticket is 50%, because I chose the incredible, talented Diane Primavera as my running mate, who previously had run the Susan G. Komen Foundation, herself as a cancer survivor, and is a champion for access to health care.
Both of you are white, though.
And we're talking about your entire staff here.
Again, look at our track record. My chief of staff is female, the head of my campaign. I think that we will have an administration that looks like Colorado. And again, it's about gender, yes. It's also about people of color. It's also about geography. There's a lot of forms of diversity. I fundamentally believe that diversity is a strength. The more we have, the better we will govern.
So will you guarantee that at least 50% would be women, 32%
I guarantee
color?
that there'll still be some role for white men in my administration.
And Treasurer Stapleton?
Well, I would tell you that I hope my administration is 75% women. I hope it's 50% Latino, but I don't believe in quotas. I don't believe in quotas for education. I don't believe in quotas for a gubernatorial administration. I believe in selecting the most talented, qualified, capable, competent people who can serve Colorado. And that is a legacy and that I want to leave to my two daughters, is that I will choose any person, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, as long as they're willing to step up and work to keep Colorado a responsible place for families, not to make empty government promises like Congressman Polis is fond of doing, but explain to people how to pay for things. It's not exciting, but it's the responsibility of all of us in leadership.
We're going to move on. Across the country, workplace misconduct is being taken more seriously, and at the Capitol last year, we watched several lawmakers deal with allegations of bad behavior. Many of those cases became political, with people making decisions along party lines. So my question is, as governor, how can you help depoliticize the process at the Capitol? Mr. Stapleton?
Well, it's a legislative process when there's wrongdoing on the part of a lawmaker, and as we have recently sadly found with respect to Representative Melton, I have asked Congressman Polis repeatedly to join leadership in his own party and ask for Representative Melton to resign. And the head of the House Democrats has done so, the leadership in the House has done so, and he's repeatedly refused to do so after it has come out that Representative Melton was found guilty of assaulting a woman. And there should be a zero tolerance policy for Democrats, Republicans, independents, and Coloradans when it comes to assaulting a woman. And I do not understand why he is unwilling to take this step. But he has repeatedly refused to do so. I would be a governor that had a zero tolerance policy when it involved violence against women. Zero tolerance.
So that's your idea of depoliticizing the system?
Yeah, that's my idea of applying the same standard to Republicans and Democrats so that we can have a Colorado in a workplace that equally respects women.
Well, look, turning this into some sort of political attack is hardly depoliticizing a very serious issue of sexual assault, which, by the way, doesn't only affect women, it can also affect men. And of course, there's no room for anybody to feel unsafe working not only in our state capitol, but in any business across our state. And so that's why it's important that when somebody's an elected representative, they're held to that standard. Now, when you're talking about what they did or didn't do 15 or 20 years before, if they violated the law and they served the time, ultimately the voters have to make a judgment. Has this person faced the consequences? Do they deserve some form of redemption? I have urged Representative Melton to strongly consider resigning from his post. But look, I think it's important that a governor sets the tone, that we don't accept any type of harassment against men or women at the workplace.
All right, moving on. Equity. Homelessness is becoming an increasingly important issue in Colorado. How do we, at a minimum, get families with children out of off the streets first and homelessness first? We'll start with Congressman Polis.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things driving homelessness is simply the high cost of housing. I mean, you try to afford rent in Denver or Thornton or Fort Collins on a $12 an hour salary. It's hard, and that's why you have people living in cars, living under bridges, living on couches of friends. So we need to make progress partnering with local communities to provide more affordable housing opportunities close to where they live. We've done this in the Northern Colorado district. I've been honored to represent Summit County. Imagine the high cost of living in Frisco and Breckenridge. We partnered to do a 40-acre land exchange at Lake Hill, where they're developing 300 units of affordable workforce housing, so people that are teachers and cops in town can afford to live in the communities that they serve. In addition, we need to do a better job increasing access to mental health services and substance abuse, which is often an offshoot of mental health services, a form of self-medication for undiagnosed mental health issues. We need to help people recover their dignity and be able to support themselves and live with dignity.
And how would you specifically target support for families?
I started a school for homeless youth and youth in transitional housing. I co-founded the Academy of Urban Learning in Denver, and I got to know many of the young people affected up close, surrounding them with the social services they need to be able to get their high school diploma and succeed. When you're talking about young families, it's about making sure the kids have some continuity in the school that they go to, that the parents are able to, again, live with dignity. If it's a mental health issue, get the treatment they need to be able to get back to work to support themselves and their family. If they need help overcoming substance abuse, we need to do that through the healthcare system to the extent we can, rather than the criminal justice system. It doesn't do as much good to rip mom and dad away from their kids when a substance abuse issue is eating at the heart of the family.
And Mr. Stapleton, how would you answer that question regarding homelessness and getting families with children out of homelessness?
Well, we have a great family friend named Isabel who started the Bridge House in Boulder, which is now Ready to Work Colorado, and it's a fantastic program that takes homeless individuals and provides them with skills-based training so that they can restart their lives, so that they can find purpose again in their lives. We are dealing with a rapidly expanding homeless problem. Anybody who travels the 16th Street Mall can tell you that. And I think that certainly the legalization of marijuana has not helped. I'm not for repealing it. I don't think it's practical, but we have a broken regulatory model around it that we need to fix, that law enforcement will tell you is resulting in illegal grow operations in rural communities and people trucking massive amounts of marijuana to New Jersey or North Carolina and taking advantage of a pricing arbitrage. That's why I'm for fixing the regulatory model and not expanding recreational drugs like Congressman Polis has said that he wants to do. Because I don't know if it's directly linked, but I know that if somebody's on the street and they're addicted to opioids or heroin or meth, giving them the opportunity to smoke marijuana on top of it is not helpful, and it's not helpful for youth in Colorado either.
Well, look, I just have to address this because it's false. Of course I don't want to expand recreational drugs in Colorado. I don't even use recreational drugs myself. I've never smoked marijuana. But I do believe that selling marijuana through a well-regulated system is safer than having drug dealers and cartels selling it to kids on the streets of Colorado.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to the topic of immigration. A caravan of people from Central America is heading to the U.S. seeking asylum. The president tweeted yesterday the situation is a national emergency, and he's alerted Border Patrol and the military. If you were to become governor and that caravan arrived in Colorado, would they be welcome here? Mr. Stapleton.
No, because I would enhance border security. And I was very disappointed when Congressman Polis refused to take a vote supporting ICE. He would like to defund ICE. I would like ICE to do its job and make sure that we have border security. It's not just President Trump. Before President Trump, President Bush sent troops to the border. President Obama sent troops to the border. We have lived in the state of Colorado with the federal government's failure to solve our immigration problems. Congressman Polis has been in Congress for 10 years. There's plenty of blame to go around for both parties. But we need border security. We need border security so that people that are contributing to the fabric of Colorado lives, from our agriculture industry to our restaurants, can continue to do so. And I've also talked about how I disagree with the Trump administration when it comes to temporary visas for agricultural workers and the people that work our ski industry. But we need border security, and we need it now more than ever. We have an opioids crisis of opioids coming from Mexico that is contributing to appalling rates of student suicide and drug problems.
Thank you, Mr. Polis.
You know, there is a national emergency, but it's an emergency of character. It's an emergency when a 2-year-old child is ripped from their mother's arms and sent thousands of miles away. It's not who we are as a nation. Walker Stapleton has said he would send the Colorado National Guard to the border to participate in family separation. I would continue Governor Hickenlooper's executive order and seek to put it into law that we would use no taxpayer resources in Colorado to separate families. We are a compassionate nation. We're a nation of laws, and we're a nation of immigrants, and we need to reconcile those two. I think we need to do a better job making sure that we vet people that are coming to our shores. In the case of the caravan, of course, there might be a few people that are part of that caravan that will gain refugee status. Many will be sent back because they're illegally entering the country. I think we need to do a better job as a state and as a nation, making sure that we reflect our laws as a welcoming people and do what we can to accommodate the failure of the federal government to fix our broken immigration system.
I would like to,
we got to move on. I'm sorry. How do you
I don't
practice
support
empathy?
separating families, and that's totally mischaracterizing my point of view on the issue. But I do support making sure that our borders are secure, and I also support dreamers, and I support those who contribute to the fabric of our state. But Congressman Polis is totally mischaracterizing my point of view to score political points. And guess what? An executive order from the state of Colorado, we've never spent a dime of Colorado money in border security, and nor will we ever. And so I don't believe in political tokenism, which you've learned as a handy trick during your time in Congress.
Look, I'm glad you don't support that, Walker, but you did say you'd send our Colorado National Guard troops to the border. I'm glad you've changed your mind and have shown some compassion.
Gentlemen, thank you. This is obviously a very touchy subject, so I'd like to pull out through the 30,000-foot view. How do you practice empathy in your personal life? And we'll start with Treasurer Stapleton.
I practice empathy because of the many nonprofits that I've been involved with. I practice empathy with my kids every single day to tell them how to treat people with respect and dignity. And it's one of the characteristics that I think I'm most proud of in my 3 children. My 2 daughters are probably playing with slime now and wrecking our house, but they've learned how to approach every individual with dignity and respect. And I think that's something that I've always tried to do, and I think it's something that should be expected of people who want to seek public office.
Mr. Polis?
Well, certainly in raising our 2 great kids, 7 and 4, and making sure that I'm always there to be a shoulder to cry on or somebody to talk to friends and family, calling and checking in with my mom every night, who I'm sure is watching this tonight. Hi, Mom, I'll call you after the debate. And really just making sure that on the human level, I try to connect with those in our immediate circle to be of help and to be a resource for them. And of course, carrying over into public work, I've served on the boards of advocacy organizations for health care. I've started schools to serve kids that otherwise didn't have a school. And I'm really honored to have done that work, and I look forward to being a governor that can really identify with what a lot of Coloradans go through every day and help them not just get by, but thrive in our great state.
We have a very quick question for you, if you can answer this in 15 seconds. You each have small children, so give us an example of how you handle conflict in your household. Mr. Polis?
Well, look, it's a 7 and 4-year-old, so they certainly have a little bit of conflict from time to time. Most recently, they try to talk over one another. I hope they're not gaining any lessons from this debate. So I tell them not to watch the debates, but what I do tell them is take turns. And so, Caspian, it's your turn to talk. Now, Cora, it's your turn to talk. Don't talk over one another.
15 seconds.
Share toys whenever possible. Take timeouts if you can't be respectful at the dinner table. Treat everybody who's an adult with respect. Look them in the eye when you shake their hand, and say nice to meet you.
Thank you. We are out of time for the Denver 7 broadcast. A big thank you to the University of Denver Center on American Politics for hosting this evening here at the Cable Center. We are continuing the debate online on the denverchannel.com and, of course, on the denverpost.com. We hope you join us there.
Welcome back. I am Nick Garcia of the Denver Post here at the last gubernatorial debate with Andrew Hill from 7 News. Gentlemen, we're moving on to crime. Crime in Colorado has been on an upswing and outpacing the nation. Now, just last month, the Denver Post reported all forms of violent crime in Colorado has steadily increased over the past 5 years, according to the CBI. What, as governor, will you do to help reverse this trend? We'll start with Treasurer Stapleton.
Well, thanks. During my time as treasurer, the budget for the Department of Corrections has expanded, and what has happened is violent crime and the costs of violent crime have gone up at the county level. And what has happened with the state prison population is it has remained stagnant, or in some years it has gone down, as have the costs. And there has been a cost shifting from state prisons to counties that has been very bad. And the reason that this has happened has been misguided parole policies that have been passed in the last 8 years that have set mandatory parole at 30 days for individuals. And so what happens is if somebody is addicted to drugs and crime is a manifestation, they go through the county process, the costs go up, they get transferred to state prison, no rehabilitative services, no mental health services, they're released after 30 days, and they're ravenous to use drugs again and go back to their life of crime that put them in a position to be incarcerated in the first place. We can and we must do a better job of this, because this endless vicious cycle is not helping our corrections problem.
Congressman Polis.
Well, the state can be a very important partner with our local police, our local sheriff's departments through the Colorado Bureau of Investigations. And yet we also need to make sure we do a better job making sure that we address substance abuse and mental health issues in a way that, first of all, is less costly to taxpayers, because the most expensive way to deal with mental health and substance abuse is through the prison system. But just as importantly, if not more, are more effective in helping people turn their lives around and getting off of the substances they're addicted to. I've recently talked to a large county sheriff who said about 1/3 of the people entering their prison system have a detox-related or substance abuse issue. I think we can do better by having better coordination between healthcare and the correction system to make sure that we're having better patient outcomes at a lower cost to taxpayers.
Does either of you believe that legalized marijuana has had any role in this increase in crime?
It certainly hasn't helped, and that's why I'm for, we have a broken regulatory system. Ask any law enforcement official, which is why I say it needs to be fixed. Once you have a medical card, you can grow up to 98 plants, and law enforcement officials are busting up illegal grow operations with medical cards, and they're not serving any medical purpose. Plants are being cut down and trucked out of state, and we need to fix this. And if we do fix it, we will have marijuana as a substance that is out of the hands of kids and is a more ongoing concern for our budget in Colorado.
Thank you, Mr.
And of
Polis.
course, the state would cooperate with local law enforcement and federal law enforcement to go against and act against any illegal grow operations in our state. We have laws for a reason. And when we want to make sure it's done safely, that we don't have marijuana or any other drug that is taken out of the supply chain at some point and sold in the underground market where it could be sold to minors.
Thank you both.
Thank you. So both of you have made numerous promises which are going to require tax dollars. You both want more money to go to roads and to classrooms. While the governor has very little say over the budget, you're going to be working with lawmakers to craft that budget. How are you identifying your spending priorities, and how are you going to work with the legislature to see those priorities enacted? And we'll start with Congressman Polis.
One of our top priorities for the very first legislative session will be to go from half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten, working with longtime Republican and Democratic champions like Republican Jim Wilson of Salida. The cost estimate is about $200 million. We can find that from the general fund. It'll be our priority to save families money on full-day kindergarten and make sure every family has access. We also want to expand preschool slots. Now, the goal will be to get to preschool for every kid. We're not going to get there right away, but we want to increase the Colorado preschool program, which is a great program that has quality metrics, that saves families money, and those will be some of our priorities in our first legislative session.
Treasurer Stapleton, priorities.
Well, I'll do the exact same thing I've done as treasurer, as governor, which is work with legislators from both parties on consequential economic policy legislation. And I'm the only person running for governor who's actually explained to people how I'm going to pay for things. And that's in sharp contrast to Congressman Polis, who has made $90 billion worth of radical extreme promises. He's going to be campaigning with Bernie Sanders, who he couldn't come up with one iota of difference, an avowed socialist of how their policies are different. And here, let me break it down for everybody. The budget of Colorado, $30 billion. $20 billion comes from all of us as taxpayers, 10 from the federal government. If you're unapologetically, as he is doing, promising to triple the size of state government, the bad news, I can tell you as treasurer, the only way to do that is to tax people through the roof or tax businesses through the roof. Either one makes Colorado a really bad place to live and work in the future. And I want to make sure that the promises we make in government we can pay for, and they're not just empty government promises that make life harder on the hardest working Coloradans.
And
the
what
ones who
would
can
you
least
like to
afford it.
pay for in your first year?
Roads, infrastructure, and attainable housing are the most important thing, and making sure that we expand access and affordability to our healthcare system, to the Coloradans that are the most vulnerable.
Well, and you'll notice in his first answer, he talked entirely about what I don't believe rather than what he does believe. This is a false figure. Again, I think we should spend less money on healthcare, not more. We're getting ripped off and spending too much. The last thing we should do is throw more money at healthcare. I think that we need to make sure that our renewable energy plan saves money. Ours does. It's not the plan that he's attacking. It's a plan to get there with concrete ideas at polisforcolorado.com.
All right. Well, either way, Colorado is seeing an unprecedented economic boom, but it probably cannot last long or forever at least. Some economists believe we'll fall into a recession during the second half of your term. So when things tighten up, how will you decide your budget priorities, and where specifically do you see the fat? Where would you cut back? Mr. Stapleton?
Well, I support a bipartisan effort that my friend Bob Rankin is starting from Garfield County to update the Gallagher formula and how it contributes to the to residential versus commercial property taxes, and how that is linked with school funding is really important. I think we need more flexibility in budgeting. We need more accountability and transparency in budgeting. What we don't need to do is expand the budget 3 times its size. His renewables, $45 billion. His healthcare plan, $35 billion. Billions of dollars of false promises for education. A water plan where he wants to take away severance taxes. And it's important to note that you need to explain how you're going to pay for things. And I haven't made $90 billion of promises. I've talked about dedicated sources of revenue that I will lead us to finding in the general fund, and not soaking
One more
taxpayers
time, where would you cut
with
back?
tax increases.
Where would you cut back?
Where would I cut back?
Yes.
We're not going to have to cut back.
During a
We're going
recession,
to
you won't
find
have
more.
to cut back?
We're in a recessionary period. We are going to find. We're going to have more transparency. We're going to have more accountability. And right now, the place that gets dinged is higher education because it's not protected by a constitutional mandate. I want to have more flexibility in budgeting so that higher education doesn't get hit every time we're in a recessionary period.
Mr. Polis?
Look, I'm glad that neither of us support $90 billion in spending. Walker Stapleton's support of 109 would actually make the situation considerably worse. That's putting the state billions of dollars into debt, forcing interest payments every year. We can afford it next year, although it'll detract from our public schools. But when the next recession hits, that'll be an additional money we have to take away from everything else. When you look at the big ticket items in the state, it's going to be hard to cut and slice, and it's a matter of values. I wouldn't want to cut our schools. I would see if we could have savings on corrections, another big ticket item, as we talked about. Is there a way that we can address mental health and substance abuse issues more effectively, but yes, also considerably less expensively as a health care issue rather than as a criminal justice issue?
All right, so during Governor Hickenlooper's time in office, the legislature was usually split. Only 2 out of 8 years were both chambers controlled by Democrats. If you must also work with a split legislature, how will you envision doing that, especially after this scorched earth campaign we've seen here in Colorado? Treasurer Stapleton.
Well, during my 8 years as Treasurer of Colorado, I've had no legislative authority. I've had a persuasion authority on important economic policy issues, and I've persuaded away, and we've gotten a lot done. In fact, every single bill that has come out of the Treasurer's office has had broad bipartisan support from Republican and Democratic legislators. I'm really proud of that. And Congressman Polis has spent 10 years in Congress, voted with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time. I think Coloradans want a governor that's more than 6% bipartisan, and passed 2 solitary pieces of legislation into law, 2 weird esoteric land swaps that nobody's ever heard of. And so his track record as a legislator, to actually legislate and pass laws, 2 obscure land bills over 10 years. I've passed more bills as treasurer without any legislative authority than he has as a legislator in Congress, long way away. So I have a track record of working with Republicans and Democrats, and I will continue doing just that.
First of all, I'm proud of having been rated the most effective member of the House from Colorado, Republican or Democrat. I've passed over 91 bills, looked that up after Walker falsely claimed 2 at the last debate, including helping to write the Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind, which gives our state more flexibility with regard to how we go forward. Look, I think good ideas can come from the left, the right, the center. When it comes to something like saving families money on health care, it's not, and it shouldn't be, an ideological issue. There is no good reason that insulin has gone up 1,000% in the last 15 years, that an EpiPen costs $450 here in Colorado, $50 in Canada. And yes, just as the problem was created by Republicans and Democrats, it'll take Republicans and Democrats working together to solve it and save families money.
Mr. Stapleton, if Democrats were to control both chambers, how will you work with them and be more than just a governor of no?
Well, I've worked with Democratic-controlled chambers during my time as treasurer. I'm familiar with working with them. We've still passed consequential economic policy legislation, and I keep using $90 billion. I'm sorry, I guess it's a conservative figure, Congressman, because it's probably more like $100 billion. But it doesn't change the fact that now we're in our 6th debate, and you've refused steadfastly to say, hey, we're going to pay for even $1 billion worth of things, and that's because you know that the only way to pay for things is tax increases on individuals or on businesses. And your health care plan alone would bankrupt the state of Colorado. Not to mention your renewable plan, which would also bankrupt the state of Colorado. You supported a 2,000-foot setback, which you bankrolled, which would drive 230,000 jobs out of Colorado, take $32 billion out of our economy. Your health care plan would cost tens of thousands of healthcare jobs in research and innovation and rural doctors, which our communities need. This is not the Colorado we want, mandating our way of life. Colorado is a libertarian state that wants to keep government out of our lives and keep us free and independent as Coloradans.
Mr. Polis, we'll give you 30 seconds to rebut there.
Well, thank you. Again, Walker spends a lot of time talking about policies I don't support because he's trying to hide the policies that he does support, which have hurt Colorado families and benefit the special interests that support him. We're spending too much money on health care already. We need to spend less, not more. We talked about our plan to fund preschool and kindergarten, social impact bonds, along with money from the general fund, renewable energy, 20% less cost a day. than existing coal. And of course, there's no mandate that is part of that, and that's not the price tag that any of those policies have. They'll save money.
Congressman, the governor of Colorado called your energy plan radical.
Sir,
the
we need to
gubernatorial
move on.
nominee in New Mexico said the math doesn't work on
Congressman
your health care
Polis,
plan.
the next
This is all
question,
just
if
bogus Congress speak.
If Democrats control both chambers, how are you going to prevent the party from falling out of step with the vast majority of Coloradans who find themselves in the middle?
Yeah, look, I've built businesses. I've created hundreds of jobs. I've met payroll. It is a challenge of a governor, sometimes to even stand up to their own party. I've done that when it was difficult, when it was standing up to members of our own party to expand markets for grown in Colorado and made in Colorado products in East Asia. And yes, I would be a governor for all Coloradans. I met with a group of evangelical ministers the other day and let them know that, of course, I would be a governor for them. And I care deeply about our communities of faith and making sure that they can contribute to making our state even better.
All right, you both seem very interested in talking about health care tonight. So, Denver 7 viewer Sue wants us to ask you about health care issues. And she has a two-part question. First, what do you have planned to bring down astronomical health care costs? And secondly, what is the plan to make sure that everyone will have access to affordable health care? Mr. Polis.
I'm glad she asked. So first of all, we want to use bundled payments through Medicaid like the state of Arkansas has used. It's effectively applying a Kaiser-type model to the state administration of Medicaid dollars. In Arkansas, it saved almost 30%. We want to have a state reinsurance for some of the highest cost cases to have a common risk pool like Alaska and Oregon did to prevent those cases from driving up rates for the rest of us. And yes, we need to take on the high cost of prescription drugs, because whether you pay for them directly out of pocket and you see that cost, or whether it's simply passed along to you in the form of higher insurance, Coloradans and Americans are tired of being ripped off. We want to use all the leverage we have, both as a state and working with other states, to negotiate better prescription drug prices and pass the savings along to hardworking Coloradans.
Treasurer Stapleton.
Well, we have a health care plan that improves access and affordability to health care for young Coloradans. In western Colorado, 14 of 64 counties have one choice of health care provider. Some counties have seen premium increases of 70%. Young people are paying more for their health insurance than they are for their home mortgages or for their rent. We talked about investing more in mental health, working with all the different state agencies from HCPF to DHS to our Department of Insurance to actually help streamline the process of Medicaid expansion to deal with fraud and overbilling. But I have a big difference with Congressman Polis. He was a federal sponsor of a Medicare for all, a universal system. He believes in a single payer system. Just go to his website. And that is a more expensive form of health care than we just defeated 2 years ago in a bipartisan way. He said that he supports payroll taxes. The payroll taxes 2 years ago were 10%. What are they going to be, 15, 20? Whatever they're going to be, Pizza Hut or Merrill Lynch wouldn't be doing business in Colorado anymore. And Vermont has already tried to lower the cost of prescription drugs from Canada, one of the tenets of your plan, and they found out they couldn't do it 3 years ago because Canada and the United States don't want to agree to it.
So, Treasurer
that's another
Stapleton,
sham.
you brought up a subject that a Denver Post reader also brought up with us. Bill from Highlands Ranch has this question for Congressman Polis. Colorado overwhelmingly voted against single-payer health care 2 years ago, yet you are promising a single-payer system without any specifics. How would your plan be different from Amendment 69?
Well, again, I did not support Amendment 69. I think Coloradans agreed that it would drive up costs. Look, I look forward to working with Republicans and Democrats to save Coloradans money. This is not a partisan issue. It's not an ideological issue. It's an issue that I, for one, am tired of being ripped off. And you know what? When I meet with small businesses across the state, almost the first or second thing out of their mouth, whether it's a restaurant or a tech company, are the high cost of health care. So we want to work with our businesses to save money on health care. Again, I feel that the Medicaid bundling, the reinsurance program, saving money on prescription drugs alone are 25%, about a quarter of all health care costs. So if we can make a big dent in that and pass the savings along, not only will people have more money left in their pocket, but yes, we can use existing resources to expand coverage.
But
to reach we're almost there, Nick. We have about 7 or 8% of Coloradans that don't have health care. The only way to get to any type of universal health care coverage is to save money through better pricing on prescription drugs, bundled payments, and other increasing scope of care for nurses and nurse practitioners.
Is that a single-payer system, though?
I'm never caught up on the number of payers, whether it's 1 or 17. I want to make sure we cut administrative waste and pass the savings along to Colorado families.
Mr. Stapleton, you obviously want to step in here.
Well,
Please.
I mean, that's just congressional speak for I don't have the foggiest idea how I'm going to pay for it. But I'm going to make false promises of free. It turns out when the government's budget becomes looser, the household budget becomes tighter. It's why I've met with the leadership at UC Health, Children's Hospital, who point out that the damage that Congressman Polis would do of a state-run healthcare system to research and innovation at UC Health, at Denver Health, at Children's Hospital, in rural Colorado, where we're struggling for docs as it is, it would result in more less quality care, longer lines, less access to life-saving drugs, and his plans of having Canada lower drug prices. My running mate passed transparency in emergency room billing. I want to take that transparency across our healthcare network. I don't want to make false promises to people and not be able to deliver on them, because that's not compassionate, it's cruel. And I had my best friend when he was 12 died of cystic fibrosis. Under Congressman Polis, we wouldn't have the research and innovation that has actually extended his life.
Thank you.
It
Mr.
would leave.
Stapleton, you have said that Medicaid's coverage of Coloradans has cut into the budget for roads and education. You also say health care is one of two topics you've heard from constituents about the most. Can you promise them that you will not make cuts to their Medicaid coverage?
Absolutely. We have a moral obligation to make Medicaid sustainable, because half of the Medicaid population are kids, even though from a cost standpoint, they only represent about a quarter or a fifth of the cost. We're not going to be able to protect the children and the most vulnerable on Medicaid, especially long-term care. I've had meetings with the Colorado Healthcare Association representing 200 of 208 nursing homes. Congressman Polis has no plan for long-term care for the most vulnerable Coloradans, zero. And they're the ones who have the biggest pot of money, and if they enter the system on Medicare, they leave on Medicaid because their savings are depleted. He wants to drive our healthcare system off a cliff. It's why the Kaiser Family Foundation has said that his universal plan would put 300,000 seniors Medicare at risk. That's not compassionate, it's cruel, it's an empty government promise that would bankrupt Colorado and hurt Coloradans' access to health care who can afford it the least.
Congressman Polis, 30-second response.
Well, once again, he talks more about what my plans aren't than what his plans are. I've been a staunch supporter of Medicare nationally, standing up and voting against Republican budgets that voucherize and privatize the Medicare guarantee, which is a basic building block, a linchpin, if we ever want to achieve universal access to health care in Colorado. It's why we have ideas to reduce costs. I'm glad that Walker agrees with at least one of them, that's pricing transparency. I think they took a first step, but we need to go further to encourage the market mechanisms to work by having pricing transparency in the system. Yes, we need to save money on Medicaid. There's proven models like Arkansas moving to a bundled payment system and allowing that to expand coverage to more people at a lower cost.
Thank you. We want to switch gears here. Mr. Stapleton, you did not support the red flag bill last session. You've set forth a few different changes you would like to see. If the legislature sends you a bill with the fixes that you have outlined, would you sign the bill even if the NRA still opposes it?
Sure. The NRA won't make decisions for me. I will make decisions that pragmatically reduce gun violence. And as a father of 3 school-age kids, I couldn't imagine anything worse than one of my kids going off to school and having a tragedy ensue. But I've talked about practical steps. I think we need a public safety officer in every single school. I would be for finding a way to prioritize metal detectors. We need to close the loop between mental health professionals who are doctors and psychiatrists. When they see somebody that is mentally ill and is a threat to himself or their community, they need to actually report it to law enforcement. And yet, if you look at a number of the mass shootings that have taken place, there's been a systemic failure of medical professionals to do so. I was concerned that the red flag bill was rushed, that it didn't equally apply due process, that there was no representation for the accused. And Arizona has passed a bill that is similar to the red flag bill that equally applies due process that I would support.
Congressman Polis, besides a red flag bill, which you said you would support, what additional gun control regulation will you champion during your first year, and how would you work with the Republican-controlled Senate to turn your ideas into law?
So we're a state with many law-abiding gun owners for sport, for hunting, for home defense, and it's a cherished right that's in our Second Amendment of our Constitution. There's nothing inconsistent with that right to have a gun with red flag laws that provide a way to have a temporary mental health hold on somebody who's in a mental health crisis from having access to their guns. It was of great concern to me that over 400 guns were stolen from gun stores in the last year alone, wound up almost by definition in the hands of criminals. So we need to do a better job making sure we have security requirements at our gun stores. We also have to avoid going backward. I strongly support the universal background checks that were put in 3 years ago that have prevented hundreds of guns from being sold to criminals. A universal background check that Walker Stapleton has said that he opposes, the measures from 3 years ago. So I think we need to move forward rather than backward and make sure that we work with responsible gun owners across our state to improve gun safety.
Treasurer Stapleton, 30 seconds.
Again, that's mischaracterizing my views. What I've said is Colorado already had a system of background checks in place. The latest round of checks a couple years ago criminalized somebody who's a farmer giving a shotgun to his son or a neighbor for a day of shooting. And I don't think that that's the Colorado way. It drove Magpul out of our state because of limits that did not make sense. I differ with Congressman Polis because he wants municipalities to decide gun laws which aren't even enforceable and trample people's Second Amendment rights. And I will not do that as governor.
Thank you. Mr. Stapleton, Colorado Democrats have put your empty parking spot front and center over the past month, making it a campaign issue. You say you're parking elsewhere. Are you working at the Capitol daily? Had you been at work more regularly, would this have become an issue?
No, I don't pay
What's the
attention to
deal?
political gimmicks like that. And when I ran for re-election as treasurer against one of Congressman Polis's former colleagues, Congresswoman Markey, she made the exact same charge. And it's just silly. It's ridiculous. I don't even have a state ID badge because I don't need it to enter the Capitol, and I never have. And I think what's atrocious is a parking spot for me as a statewide elected official being used in political gamesmanship. Coloradans know that I've been showing up every day to work, fighting for taxpayers, fighting for the values I believe in, and this is part of the hogwash that gets thrown about in a political campaign, but it doesn't mean I have to play along.
And so how do you get to work?
I get to work like most people do. I drive to work. Occasionally I take the RTD bus. Occasionally I get dropped off.
All right, Congressman Polis, you have your own attendance issues. According to Congressional Quarterly, you missed a third of your votes on the Rules Committee. You've dismissed the votes as not important. How would you respond if one of your own employees decided not to show up because they thought something wasn't important?
So my attendance rate, which I'm not sure you're citing correctly, is actually 96% on votes. I missed votes during 3 main periods of my 10 years of service to our state. Our floods of 2013, 2 weeks, very important to be with the rescue operations and working with our sheriffs. When my son was born in 2011, and when my daughter was born a couple of years later. Other than that, again, about a 96% attendance rate in contrast to Walker Stapleton's 53% attendance rate at para board meetings and other meetings that took attendance.
You did, though, say earlier in this campaign that the votes you missed were important.
Look, I'd have to look at what votes I missed during those weeks, but when I was, literally on helicopters working with flood rescue operations, that was a more important place for me to be than voting in Washington. You always have to do what's most important with your job, and yes, I support family and medical leave for all Coloradans. Now, I only got to take, I think, 2 weeks in the case of one child, 3 weeks in the case of the other, but I have for our staff 8 weeks of medical leave paid when they have kids, and we've had staff members who've had kids.
Congressman Polis, you've long championed recreational marijuana, expanding LGBTQ rights, and advocated for immigrants in the country without documentation. How can you assure voters who disagree with you on these policy issues tonight that you will not ignore their concerns?
Well, you put a whole bunch of issues in there for 1 minute. Again, I think that one of the things that makes our state great is that we empower local communities to solve problems. So when you look at what the voters did with recreational marijuana, Amendment 64, they didn't say that any town or county had to have it. They simply gave the option for towns and counties to allow it and regulate it if they want to have dispensaries, if they want to have grow operations. And I, of course, completely respect and support communities that have chosen not to, just as communities that have. I think it's important that we all get along together in our state. You know, in a political campaign, it seems like everything's about the Republican-Democratic divide. You'll find when you dig down, that's not the fundamental divide in our state. It's about workers and executives. It's about Front Range and Western Slope. It's about Northern Colorado and Southern Colorado. It's about different communities. So a governor needs to be somebody that listens to the great diversity that forms our entire state and tries to do their best to move that forward to make our state even better.
Treasurer Stapleton, 2 of the most well-known politicians who have endorsed you are Tom Tancredo and Donald Trump. Both like to say that liberals and Democrats have taken political correctness too far. But both of those men have made comments some suggest are racist and sexist without apology. Where do you draw the line?
Well, I draw the line by pointing out that just because somebody endorses me and makes the decision to endorse me doesn't mean that I endorse all their views or everything that they say. This election is between Walker Stapleton and Jared Polis. It's between Jared Polis's plans, which I believe will bankrupt Colorado, will cause people to pay twice what they're paying in income taxes, twice what businesses are paying. And I know he'd like to make the election between Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist who he cannot come up with one single solitary difference in policy. There's not going to be no need for him to feel the burn because he is the burn. No need for him to dress up as Bernie for Halloween because he is Bernie.
Why is it okay?
And we don't want a socialist for governor. And so, yes, Nick, shoot.
You said that just because Donald Trump doesn't endorse
Yeah,
you
I'm not
doesn't
here to
mean-
defend the president's personality. I'm here to work and defend the president's policies when they make life better for Coloradans and stand up when they don't. And that's what an election for governor is about, a strong CEO that will work with the federal government on policies that make life better for Coloradans and stand up to the president on misguided policies that may not do so.
And if I could just give a few policies that I disagree with Bernie Sanders on, and of course I think it's great that he inspires so many young people. I disagreed with him on the Jobs Act, which allowed for crowdfunding. I was a co-sponsor, helped write it in the House. He voted against it in the Senate. I supported balance the budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution. He does not. I supported expanding markets in East Asia to grown in Colorado products. I'll throw in a fourth one for free. While my hair is thinning, I still have more hair than Bernie Sanders.
All right.
All right, we have one last question. This is a viewer question. It comes from Janet, and she asks, if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade and leaves legalization up to each state, what will be your position on abortion in Colorado?
Treasurer Stapleton.
Well, I've said many times that I support Roe versus Wade being the law of the land. I don't get to pick and choose elements of the Constitution that I like or don't like, but I've also said that I would be a pro-life governor, just like Governor Ritter, a former Democratic governor, just like Congressman Perlmutter. And I would make sure that as far as Colorado's Constitution is concerned, that we honor the fact that it's been in Colorado's Constitution since the early 1990s that federal taxpayer dollars should not be used for abortion-related services. And I'm not going to speculate on federal law, but I accept that Roe versus Wade is the law of the land.
What does that mean when you say Roe v. Wade is the settled law?
It means that it's settled law. It's settled Supreme Court law, and it means that the two most recent justices to the Supreme Court weren't going to speculate on their positions on overturning it. So if they're not going to speculate in a position of actually authority to do something about it, I'm not going to speculate as the governor of Colorado. But I will enforce Colorado's laws, and when I take an oath to defend the Constitution, that's what the next governor should do.
Thank you. Mr. Polis.
Look, here's some conservative speculation. Roe versus Wade is on the way out. It's already been eroded with the appointment of two more anti-choice justices. It's only a matter of time till we lose those basic protections, and governors won't be able to hide behind precedents as it gets eroded and overturned. I believe in access to reproductive health. I'm pro-choice, and I think that it's important that those decisions are made between a woman, her doctor, and her God, and not by Walker Stapleton.
And can I? And he has refused to say that he would prevent a woman from getting an abortion a minute before a baby is born. That is a late-term abortion
Mr. Polis,
that, by and large, Coloradans do not support.
There is nobody, Democrat or Republican, pro-choice or pro-life, who ever supports that kind of horrific thing you're talking about, Walker Stapleton. And of course, there's times when
prevent it, though, which is unconscionable.
Walker,
to me.
there's times when a life has to be chosen, right? I mean, who among us is God? There's a doctor, there's a woman, and these are tragic situations that should never, ever be politicized.
All right. On that note, I know we have covered a lot of territory. We are out of time. Thank you so much for your answers this evening. Thank you so much for all of you participating tonight as well. On behalf of all of us at Denver 7, the Denver Post, we'd like to thank the University of Denver's Center on American Politics for hosting this debate tonight. A big thank you to everyone who followed along. You know when your ballot is due 2 weeks from today, right? So thank you, everybody, and I will see you on Denver 7 and 10.